The sandbar surfaced briefly, as it always did. It appeared not as land, but as resistance, water slowing, then thinning, then lifting just enough to reveal a long, pale ridge beneath the surface. The bar existed only at a specific balance between tide height and current speed. It did not rise. The water simply moved away from it for a while. The seal reached it near the turn of the tide. It hauled its body out of the water in a single, practiced motion, foreflippers digging into wet sand, hindquarters following with a heavy drag. The movement was efficient but costly. Once on land, seals did not move easily. The seal stopped. Its body lay elongated along the crest of the bar, sides heaving slightly as breathing deepened. Wet fur glistened, catching the low light. Sand clung to the underside, sticking where the skin still held water. The sandbar felt firm. At first, the surface was saturated but compacted, pressed flat by the retreating tide. It accepted the seal's weight without collapse. The animal settled lower, letting its mass distribute across a broader area. This was the point. Rest required stillness. Heat conservation required exposure. Both depended on the bar holding long enough to matter. The seal lifted its head slightly. Around it, water still moved. Channels threaded the bar on both sides, narrow and shallow now, their flow reduced but not stopped. The tide had turned, but it had not paused. The seal closed its eyes. Muscle tension eased marginally. The body shifted once, pressing deeper into the sand. The surface responded slowly, deforming just enough to cradle weight. The bar appeared stable, but stability here was deceptive. The sandbar did not anchor itself. It existed only while water levels stayed within a narrow range. Below that range, it submerged completely. Above it, it dissolved into current. The seal remained motionless. Minutes passed. The tide continued to rise. At first, the change was subtle. Water crept higher along the channels flanking the bar. The sound of flow sharpened slightly, gaining direction. Small ripples reached farther up the bar's sides before retreating. The seal felt this before it saw it. Cool water touched the edge of its flank, then withdrew. The contact was brief, almost tentative. The seal did not move. This was normal. The seal had rested on bars like this before. The body trusted pattern more than sight. But today, the timing was wrong. The tide advanced faster than expected. Water returned not as a slow flood, but as a steady reclaiming. Channels widened, their edges softened. Sand began to loosen where it had seemed firm. The seal lifted its head again. The bar was narrower now. What had been dry moments before glistened again. The line between land and water moved inward without stopping to rest. The seal shifted its body slightly, adjusting position to remain on the highest part of the ridge. This movement was slow and heavy. On sand, every adjustment cost energy. The surface responded differently now. Where the seal pressed down, the sand no longer rebounded. It slumped, drawing water inward instead of pushing it away. The bar's firmness was already changing. The tide did not wait. There was no plateau where the bar held steady before disappearing. Water climbed continuously, erasing the bar from the edges inward. The seal paused, head raised, body still. Leaving would require effort, sliding back into water that was already deepening, aligning the body correctly, committing to movement before rest was complete. Staying would mean allowing water to return around the body, lifting it before the seal chose to move. The seal remained on the bar for several seconds longer, measuring. The sandbar was still there, but it was no longer a place to stay. It had become a moment that was already passing. And as water continued to climb without hesitation, the seal understood, without urgency, without confusion, that rest here would be incomplete, and that the decision ahead was not about comfort, but about control, whether to leave the bar deliberately or allow the tide to take that decision away. The tide did not slow, the sandbar did not hold, and the seal lay at the narrowing crest, balanced between a place that was vanishing and water that had already resumed its claim, aware that the window for choosing when to move was closing faster than the body could fully recover. The seal did not rise immediately. It remained stretched along the crest of the sandbar, body heavy, breath deep and regular. Rest had begun, but it had not completed its work. Muscles were still carrying the residue of effort from hauling out, and the warmth gained from exposure had not yet spread inward. Water touched the bar again. This time it did not withdraw as far. A thin sheet slid up the side of the ridge and lingered, seeping into the sand rather than retreating cleanly. The sound changed from scattered trickles to a low, continuous movement. The seal opened one eye. The bar was narrowing faster now. What had been dry moments earlier darkened as water infiltrated from below. The sand's texture shifted, firmness giving way to softness that no longer held shape. The seal shifted its weight slightly. The movement pressed sand outward, but instead of resisting, the surface collapsed inward. Water filled the depression immediately, spreading under the body. The bar was losing its ability to support weight without deformation. Rest was no longer neutral. Each second spent motionless now allowed the tide to take more of the bar's structure away. The seal could feel buoyancy beginning to return, not enough to lift, but enough to reduce friction between body and ground. The seal lifted its head higher. Channels on both sides of the bar had widened. Flow was visible now, not just felt. Water moved with purpose again, drawn by the rising tide rather than lingering from the fall. The seal waited. This pause was different from the one before. It was no longer for recovery, it was for timing. Leaving too early meant sliding into water while the body was still stiff, expending energy unnecessarily. Leaving too late meant being lifted and turned by current rather than choosing direction. The seal tested the surface with a small movement of a foreflipper. Sand yielded instantly. The flipper sank deeper than expected, meeting water almost immediately. The bar no longer offered resistance where it had moments ago. The seal withdrew the flipper and held still again. The highest point of the bar remained just beneath its chest. That ridge was now the only place where the seal's weight could still rest without full immersion. The tide continued to rise. Water crept up the seal's sides, first to the lower flank, then to the belly. Each wavelet arrived slightly higher than the last. There was no pause between advances. The seal exhaled slowly. The body began to adjust. Muscles that had relaxed during rest started to re-engage. Not fully, but enough to prepare for movement. The seal did not rush. It waited until buoyancy reduced the cost of movement just enough. The moment when sand no longer held, but water had not yet taken full control. That moment arrived quietly. The seal shifted forward, angling its body toward the deeper channel on one side of the bar. The movement was smooth, controlled. Sand slid away beneath it, water rushing in to replace it. The seal paused again, only briefly. The bar was almost gone now. The ridge beneath the seal flattened and dissolved, no longer distinct enough to hold shape. The seal committed. It slid into the water without splash, letting the tide take some of its weight. The body aligned naturally, flippers adjusting angle, tail following. The transition was efficient, not forced, not delayed. The seal entered the channel fully and began to swim. Behind it, the sandbar continued to vanish. Water covered the crest completely, smoothing the surface until no trace of the ridge remained. The tide had not waited. It had reclaimed the bar steadily, without offering a stable interval for rest. The seal had rested just long enough to regain control, but not long enough to recover fully. As the seal moved away from where the bar had been, swimming with measured strokes, it carried the quiet knowledge that some places existed only as brief opportunities, and that waiting for comfort in them could mean losing the chance to choose how to leave at all. The sea closed over the sandbar completely, and the tide continued on, indifferent to the pause it never offered, while the seal moved back into water that, once again, behaved predictably, flowing, lifting, and carrying without pretending to be land. The seal swam just beyond where the sandbar had been. Its body moved smoothly now, buoyancy fully returned, flippers working in a steady rhythm. But the water here was already different from the water it had left moments earlier. The tide had gathered itself. Currents strengthened along the channels, drawing water inland with a slow but persistent pull. The seal adjusted its angle slightly, compensating without effort. This environment was familiar again. Behind it, the bar no longer existed. The surface where the seal had rested minutes before was indistinguishable from the surrounding water. No ridge, no resistance. The place had reverted completely. The seal slowed its pace. Swimming cost less than hauling out, but it still required coordination and energy. The seal's breathing settled into a deep, regular rhythm. Heat loss increased as the body cooled in moving water. The seal oriented itself toward a deeper channel. Here, the current ran cleaner, less turbulent. The seal preferred this path, allowing water to assist movement rather than fight it. As it swam, the seal passed over where the sandbar's edge had been. The water there behaved differently, slightly more turbulent, swirling faintly where sand had just been disturbed. The seal felt this through subtle changes in pressure along its sides. The bar was not gone entirely. Its influence lingered in how water moved, even after the surface had closed over it. The seal did not slow further. This was not a place to linger. The turbulence would smooth out soon, but for now it added unnecessary complexity. The seal moved on. Its body relaxed incrementally as distance increased. The urgency of the transition faded, replaced by the predictability of open water. The seal surfaced once, briefly. It took a controlled breath, lifting its head just above the surface, then submerged again without splash. The movement was economical, practiced. Ahead, the channel widened. The seal followed it, letting the tide carry part of the work. The water was cooler now, drawing warmth steadily from the body. The seal's metabolism adjusted, conserving energy where possible. The rest that had been intended on the sandbar would have to wait. The seal did not attempt to find another bar immediately. The tide was still rising. Any exposed sand would be temporary at best. Instead, the seal moved with the tide. This was not retreat, it was alignment. The seal remained alert to changes in flow, but no longer needed to watch the ground beneath it. Water here behaved consistently, even as it moved. Behind it, the location of the sandbar faded completely. The seal did not look back. What mattered was not the lost opportunity for rest, but the successful retention of control. Leaving when the tide allowed choice had preserved direction, speed, and orientation. As the seal swam onward, carried by water that no longer pretended to pause, it became clear that the critical moment had not been the decision to haul out, but the recognition that rest on a moving boundary could never be completed, and that leaving too late would have meant being moved rather than moving. The tide continued to rise. The seal continued forward. And the sandbar, which had existed only as a brief resistance between movements of water, left behind no trace, except in the way the seal adjusted its timing the next time it considered resting on ground that belonged, ultimately, to the sea. The seal did not search for another place to haul out. The tide was still rising, and the water carried that information clearly now. Flow had direction. Depth increased steadily. Any remaining shallows would disappear as quickly as the last one had. The seal adjusted its course slightly offshore. Here, the current was smoother, less interrupted by submerged ridges. Swimming became more efficient. Each stroke translated cleanly into forward movement instead of being absorbed by turbulence. The seal's body cooled gradually. Water drew heat away at a steady rate, but this was expected. Muscles adjusted, conserving energy. Breathing slowed again, matching the rhythm of movement. The incomplete rest did not matter as much as it had seemed. Rest on land was valuable, but rest in water, when controlled, was predictable. The seal could regulate pace, choose depth, and align with current. The body understood this environment fully. The place where the sandbar had been left, no marker. From the surface, it was indistinguishable from the surrounding water. The ridge that had briefly supported weight existed now only as a subtle variation in flow, already smoothing out as the tide continued inland. The seal passed beyond it without noticing. Ahead, the water opened. Channels widened and merged, forming broader paths where current slowed slightly. The seal chose one and followed it, letting the tide assist without surrendering control. This was the balance, not fighting water, not yielding to it entirely. The seal surfaced once more, farther from shore. It lifted its head, took a long breath, then slipped under again. The movement was unhurried. There was no urgency now. The window that had mattered was already closed. The decision had been made at the right time, late enough to regain function, early enough to leave deliberately. That alignment mattered more than the rest itself. The seal continued swimming, posture relaxed, direction steady. The tide rose around it, but no longer dictated movement. It carried without overwhelming. It flowed instead of reclaiming. Somewhere behind, the sandbar would reappear hours later when the tide fell again. It would surface in the same place, with the same shape, offering the same brief resistance. Another seal might use it then, or the same one, under different timing. For now, it did not matter. The seal moved with the water, not against it, not waiting for it to pause again. The lesson was quiet and exact. Places that existed only between movements could not be relied upon for completion. They offered moments, not outcomes, and survival depended not on taking everything a place promised, but on recognizing when its promise was already dissolving, and leaving while the choice of direction still belonged to the body. The tide continued to rise. The seal swam on, and the sandbar, already gone, waited silently for the water to recede enough to let it appear again, briefly, conditionally, and never long enough for anyone to mistake it for land.